You. What's up? Not much, right? I'm It's funny. I've been going through some changes, and I think it's interesting because I'm starting to realize that life is change. And I know that, like, people say that generally, but I'm starting to see it actually. And the way I'm starting to see it is similar, or one of those examples, an example of how I'm starting to see it like this is when I make videos, when I make content. It's all from that point of view, from understanding that I'm changing, that I'm experiencing changes throughout my life, and documenting them as they happen, and what I've been learning from it. And I've been noticing something is beyond changing. I'm starting to deeply integrate everything that I've been learning. And I'm starting to see personally that the I, the me, the identity that undertook this change, that metamorphosis, this that person, that being, was something way beyond what I thought I was. And now I understand why I think there's more enlightened people in this world than we know. Because our language, our interface mechanism is not set up to reveal this. So the way we go out and we engage with each other, that's not set up for us to reveal who we are. And what I'm starting to see is, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, they know who they are, but they're just one person. And when you're walking down this road, when you start to cross this threshold, you get to a certain point where there's no going back. And you have no other options. You know too much. And I remember crossing this threshold as a kid, but it was on the other side. And so for me, there was no going back, because, or at least it seemed. because you can't, at the time I thought you can't unlearn something, you can't unsee something. And humans, it appears, have a natural mechanism to forget. So, dogs, if a dog gets hit, or if a dog hurts itself in any way, or feels uncomfortable, or whatever, a dog will shake. Shake. In a couple seconds, they're okay. And it's because dogs have a natural mechanism to basically cure their trauma. Now, mind you, this isn't 100%. There are definitely some dogs out there that are traumatized, but in general, most dogs cure their trauma or deal with it by self-soothing, right? They're self-soothing, shaking and stuff. And what I'm realizing is humans, our mechanism evolves over time for that. So at a certain point, there's a lot of physical stuff that humans do to deal with their trauma. But there's that thing that's doing that is also the same thing that's going to try and find another way that works, because this way doesn't exactly work for them. And that's the same thing that started, that appeared, that seemed like started this journey for me, at least. As you know, most of you know, I smoke weed. And it's official, I have my medical card, right? Yeah. And for me, this is how it started. Prior to that, I had nothing. I had sports, and I was super aggressive, and I thought that was just who I was. I thought I was just an aggressive person. So, one of the things is as a kid, and it still happens, is the soft, touchy stuff. I still don't like it, right? I still have aversions to it. And as a kid, like, you don't realize this, but as you get older, the more you become aware, it starts to make itself clear, right? Why as a kid you don't want to be touched, right? And I still am not always aware of it, right? So that's how it started for me. And eventually what I realized is when I smoke weed, my body isn't so tense, right? Now, I didn't understand that tension is from basically being alert all the time, in fight or flight, right? So from my whole life, I lived in that state. I didn't know there was another state. I didn't know that there was a peaceful state, and so I would just run around like that all the time. It's amazing I made it through school at all. But once I learned how to meditate, through the assistance of weed, because weed would get me there into that state, and then meditation would help me explore it, right? Once I learned how to meditate, I started to realize that there's a whole other side to life, and like a beautiful side to life. And it wasn't until I learned how to meditate that I could find this consistently. And so what I would do is I would get caught up and I'd think this was other things, right? If it was a person, I'd want to spend a lot of time with them. If it was a place, I'd want to be there all the time. If it was a thing, I'd be wanting doing it, whatever it was. And eventually, I came to understand that I personally couldn't just sit by myself and be happy. And that really frustrated me. So it's not like I took a conscious journey and I was like, you know what, I can't just sit and be happy anymore, so I need to figure this out. It wasn't like that for me. For me, I started having what I thought were seizures. Eventually, you got diagnosed as idiopathic movement disorder, which is a non-name. it's not a thing. But I would have full body convulsions, really strong convulsions, to the point where I ended up getting hospitalized for about a week, and I couldn't seem to get over it. Nothing could get me around it. And I was very active at the time. I was going to the gym, working out, sauna, steam room, all that type of stuff. And I couldn't understand because I didn't have the awareness to see it. And so I get my brain scanned, all this type of stuff. And eventually somebody tells me that, hey man, we can't find anything wrong. This is you. And I'm like, what do you mean this is me? And they're like, this is you doing this. So you got to figure out why you're doing this. This is a psychological thing. I'm like, fuck, man. What, are you telling me I'm crazy? And so it took me a long time to really understand what was going on. And during that time, it took a lot of hard experiences too, right? And it doesn't always have to be that way. And I guess that's kind of my warning for you is it doesn't have to get there. It doesn't have to get there. During that time, I lost a job, broke a leg, became homeless. It doesn't have to get that way, right? But it got that way for me. And that's when I really had to look at myself because there were things going on that I didn't understand. And I thought I knew who I was. I thought I got it, right? And I was a super confident person. And now I realize I don't know shit. I know nothing, right? As Master Ko says, I only know what my teacher taught me. I don't know shit. But eventually, through meditation, I started to slow down enough to really look at myself. And man, I started to see a lot of shit. A lot of shit. A lot of stuff I didn't like. And I had no training. So as I would see it, I would not look at it. I would look away, disassociate, push it away. And then I would find that that very same energy that I pushed away during that meditation or moment of awareness would come back later through one of my interactions or something happening in my life, in my external world. And this took me a long time to see. That it was because I pushed things away inside of me that it came back on me later. And I didn't understand this thing at that point. I wasn't a non-dual person, so I didn't understand this. And I think the best advice that I can give is, if you're humble enough, which I don't know if I was, if you start to meditate, make sure you have a teacher, because your teacher will kind of point this out to you so you don't start to have to learn the hard way. But I didn't have a teacher, and for me, all my life I learned the hard way. So this was just par for the course, right? It seemed like that was just life. So I started having a lot of stuff happen to me, right? And I didn't understand why. And eventually I realized that, I'm starting to look, because I'm meditating now, so I have the awareness, and I'm starting to see how, man, I was a really shitty person. It's very difficult for me to understand how I had any friends at all, and let alone girlfriends, right? So that set me into a really, really kind of deep depression, because I had to really face who I was, and who I was showing up as in the world, and that's when I realized that the person who I thought I was not the person who I was actually showing up as. And this is where people talk about cognitive dissonance. I realized the distance between those two people. And this is, I remember I was having a conversation with my therapist one day, but this is kind of what I was getting at, is I was trying to close the gap, or expand the gap, actually, between how I normally act and how I want to act, right? And the reason is because in the moment, how you normally act is how you instantly react. How you want to react is when you don't instantly react, take a breath, allow your brain to process, and you react how you want to react. And most of us have never had this training before to understand that there's a quick part of us, there's a part of us that just takes over, and it's quicker, and that part of us is typically, if we're not operating from this other part of us, from the part of us that we want to be, that takes effort to actualize, because we have to remember and have the awareness to hold a certain part of us back and to let another part of us go, or grow into that space, right? If that doesn't happen, well, the world, the people that know us, that interact with us on a daily basis, they don't see that part of us that we think we are, because that part of us is being overridden or beaten to the punch, beaten to the so responsibility is ability to respond. This part of us is now responsible for us because it has more of an ability to respond than the other part, because that part's not grown or trained yet, right? Kind of weak. So this part of us is the part that's always defending, accusing, making excuses, justifying, right? Judging. That's this part of us, the part that we hate to admit talks a little bit too much, right? And Tom Bilyeu says the game of life is ultimately how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself, right? So that part of us that's the part of us that when we're by ourselves, we tend to judge, because we know that's not who we could be, right? So all all goes to say is I realized this, and I started to see that this is something I need to train, because this part of me was not conscious, and I knew it wasn't conscious because I couldn't talk to it. It wouldn't listen, right? So the way you know you're conscious or you're not conscious, or you have conscious control over something, is if I tell you to move your hand, you move your hand, right? That's conscious control. If you make a decision to do something and you do it, that's consciousness, right? You make a decision to go and get a drink of water and fill up the glass and drink it. That's consciousness, right? Unconscious, not conscious, is you're doing something and you have no control over it. It wasn't your idea to start doing it, and you didn't want to do it, and you're doing it anyway. That's unconscious. For me, I realized most of what I was doing was unconscious. From showing up to work, to working, to having conversations, to interacting with people. And I realized that I was just in there watching myself do it. The conscious part of me, while the unconscious part is just doing its thing. And for me, I thought that was me, and I thought that was just how I was. And eventually, I came to understand that that's the part of you that's programmed to show up, to be you, right? And that's not the part of you that knows who it is, that's waiting for a chance, right? And so those are two totally different parts of you, and I had no understanding of that, right? So that's basically the game, right? If you can kind of hold that one part of you at bay, now mind you, you're gonna slip. We're all gonna have those moments, but all this other part of you needs is time and space to grow, right? Think of it like a plant, right? It's a flower, and this part of you wants to constantly. This is a weed. This is a flower, right? So this is what the Zen people will talk about: weeding the garden of your mind, right? You want to take the weeds out, right? So the flowers will just naturally grow, right? But this thing will take up all the light and it'll create darkness, right? And this is where people talk about shadow work, all that type of stuff, is because you don't see it, right? Because it's unconscious. So the goal and what meditation did for me is it gave me a light of awareness, right? And so I could sit and I could look at these parts of me and realize that as I bring light or awareness, and I would do this through my body, right? So I would seem like, oh, this part of my, like I'm looking like, oh, this part looks dark, and I'm like, okay, let's breathe and see if I can light it up, and I would. But what I would eventually realize is these darkness things are parts of my unconscious that it's being stored throughout my body, right? For laying dormant, basically, for moments to act when I'm least aware. And so this is it's a very powerful thing, but what most of us don't understand is the reality that we currently find ourselves in is constructed to cater and to favor to the unconscious part of ourselves. So as you start meditating and as you start weeding your garden, so to speak, and your flowers have room to grow, they're still growing into a world that is toxic, quite literally. And the air is not so good, and the sun kind of beats a lot, and it doesn't always rain, and you kind of have to deal with that, right? At a certain point, you find yourself with others, right, of like mind, but they're so few and far between that, and it doesn't say that they're not existing. I think they're more common than we realized, but they're so few and far between, especially when we're in that awakening state that you feel alone, right? And this is what everyone kind of talks about with the dark night of the soul. You start to feel alone, and that's difficult to deal with, right? Because you basically are. You're not completely right, but you feel like you are, and so because you feel like you are, it becomes real for you. And it's very difficult to convince somebody that they're not alone because they're going through a unique experience particular to them, right? And so it is, in the Bible, they call this the atonement. It's the facing of one and one's creations. And so that's why you feel alone, because you were the only one who was there the whole time. As A Course in Miracles would say, miscreating, right? And this is your limit that God has placed on your miscreations. And so at a certain point, you come up against reality and you're like, fuck, I got a lot of work to do. And you feel alone because at that point, you as a soul realize that this is between you and God. And your soul has work to do, right? Now, that sounds like a burden, right? And that's what this part of you wants you to think. In reality, you're still in heaven and you never left God's presence. Okay, so this is all from the point of view of the ego, which is this part of you that has to that is eventually going to be the thing that does completely erode away, right? And it will feel alone because it is alone, because it doesn't exist, right? But as long as you identify with that, as long as your point of view is on this, as long as this is you and this is not, this is just something that happens sometimes, this is going to slowly get whittled away. Because consciousness is this. Conscious. And you are consciousness because you have a brain and you're watching this, right? So that makes you consciousness. But this is the trained part of you. So, and we learn to identify, my name is Riley, my name is David, I'm 30 years old, I'm from Albany, I work as a software developer, I have a dog and a fiance. That's how we choose to engage with the world. But that's not who we really are. Who we really are is consciousness that's doing these things. So we come to understand eventually that this thing is not us. And it's at this moment that the atonement principle kicks in. Because you realize, if this isn't me, then nothing that happened was true. It only seemed to happen. Because I am this, I'm conscious, I'm consciousness. So I may have watched these things happen, but they didn't happen to me. And so as you're meditating, you start to disidentify with the body. And you realize that who you are, what you are, is boundless. And we know this because we dream at night. And when we dream at night, we do some crazy shit. But that's us. That's who we are. And the world's set up for you to disassociate from that. So my whole point is, as you start to meditate, you become aware of who you are. As you become aware of who you are, you start to, your shell of who you thought you were starts to fall away. And it's at this moment that you realize the limitless being that you truly are. and you no longer accept excuses from yourself, and you start to really truly live your purpose, which only you know, but only you have been denying. And it's when we stop denying who we really are and what our purpose is that we can actually really start living and letting that false self fall away. So, I know this was a bit long, but I hope this helps. My name is Riley. I'm your metaphysical guide. I love you. God bless you. Peace.